I used to believe that family meant safety, that sisters were supposed to catch you when you fell, and mothers were supposed to seek justice when their children were hurt, not orchestrate cover-ups when one daughter tries to kill the other. But when the forensic specialist called me 3 months after my accident to tell me they'd found clear handprint evidence on my back proving I'd been pushed off that roof, I realized my sister had tried to murder me, and my mother had spent months lying to everyone, including the police, about what really happened. My name is Autumn Hayes, and this is the story of how the people I trusted most in the world nearly got away with attempted murder disguised as a tragic accident. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the lakeside town of Clearwater Springs, Maine, I learned early that family hierarchies could be as unforgiving as the rocky cliffs that surrounded our scenic community. Our house sat on one of the highest points overlooking Clearwater Lake, a stunning colonial mansion that had been featured in tourism brochures and real estate magazines. From the outside, we looked like the perfect New England family. Successful parents, two accomplished daughters, and enough money to live comfortably in a town where most people struggled to afford the skyrocketing property values. But inside that picture-perfect house, there was a power structure that I learned to navigate from the time I could walk. One that would ultimately lead to someone trying to kill me. My parents, Kenneth and Vivian Hayes, were both successful real estate agents who had built their agency, Hayes and Associates, into the most prestigious firm in 3 counties. They were the kind of people who closed million-dollar lake house deals over cocktails and considered networking events to be family time. Respected business owners, pillars of the community, the couple everyone turned to when they needed advice about property investments or local politics. My sister Trinity was the golden child, 18 months older than me, with platinum blonde hair and the kind of effortless beauty that made photographers stop her on the street to ask if she modeled. She was the one who won beauty pageants, who dated the most popular boys, who somehow managed to turn every family gathering into a celebration of her latest achievement. I was the practical one, the backup plan. The daughter who handled the technical aspects of the family business after school and weekends, who could stage a home for sale better than professionals with decades of experience, and who managed the books and marketing campaigns while Trinity posed for photos in front of "sold" signs. The pattern established itself early and never really changed. When Trinity was 7 and accidentally broke the antique mirror in our foyer while practicing dance moves, she cried and said I had been chasing her and made her fall into it. I was 5. I spent that evening in my room without dinner while Trinity got to stay up late and watch movies with Mom and Dad for being honest about my supposed role in the accident. When she was 15 and crashed Dad's BMW into a mailbox after taking it for a joyride, she claimed she'd been rushing to pick me up from a friend's house because I'd called crying about being bullied. The fact that I'd been home doing homework the entire evening didn't seem to matter. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Autumn has always been a little jealous of Trinity's social success, my mother would explain to concerned neighbors and family friends. We're working with Autumn to help her be more supportive of her sister's achievements, but sibling rivalry can be so challenging to navigate. I learned to stay quiet, to nod when they looked at me expectantly after one of Trinity's creative explanations, to accept responsibility for situations I'd never been involved in because arguing only made the consequences worse. The narrative was always the same. Trinity was the victim of circumstances beyond her control, and I was the one who needed to learn to be more responsible and think about how my actions affect others. By the time we were teenagers, this dynamic was so established that questioning it felt impossible. Trinity glided through high school with average grades but extraordinary social achievements, while I buried myself in business classes and spent every free hour learning the real estate industry from the ground up. I knew I'd need to build my own success because it was clear that the family business would eventually be Trinity's, regardless of who was more qualified to run it. When Trinity announced she wanted to study fashion merchandising at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, a prestigious program with tuition and living expenses that would cost our parents over $60,000 per year, they immediately began planning how to make her dreams come true. When I asked about support for my plans to study business and real estate development at the University of Maine 6 months later, Dad looked uncomfortable, and Mom launched into a familiar speech about the value of earning your own way. "It builds character, sweetheart," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Trinity needs more support right now because she's exploring her creative potential. You've always been so self-sufficient and practical." Self-sufficient. That was their code for ignored. I worked multiple jobs to put myself through college, studying business administration with a focus on real estate development and property management. While Trinity posted Instagram photos from Fashion Week events and exclusive New York parties that our parents funded, I spent my evenings in the library and my weekends working as a property manager for a local rental company, learning skills that would help me build a career independent of my family's business. After graduation, I returned to Clearwater Springs and started my own property development company, focusing on sustainable renovation projects and affordable housing initiatives that Hayes & Associates wouldn't touch because the profit margins were too small. My business, Sunrise Development, was successful from day one. I had waiting lists for my renovation services, and my reputation for ethical development practices had attracted investors from across New England. I was finally building something that belonged entirely to me, something that didn't depend on my family's approval or Trinity's failures to make me look good by comparison. That's when Trinity came home. She'd graduated from FIT with a degree in fashion merchandising that she'd never used professionally, bounced between 3 different internships in New York that ended badly, and had accumulated credit card debt and student loans that made our parents deeply concerned about her financial future. Translation, they wanted her back home where they could continue managing her life while she figured out what to do next. "It's just temporary," Mom assured me during one of our monthly family dinners, where I still appeared out of obligation despite having my own apartment across town. "Trinity just needs some time to transition from the fashion world back to something more practical. She's been through so much rejection in such a competitive industry." Trinity had been transitioning and recovering from various disappointments for 26 years. What bothered me wasn't that she was living at home again, it was how quickly everyone adjusted to accommodate her needs while completely overlooking the fact that I'd built a successful business without any family support. Dad renovated the entire 3rd floor of our house into a luxury apartment for Trinity, complete with a private entrance and a view of the lake. Mom hired a decorator to make sure Trinity's space reflected her artistic sensibilities. And when Trinity mentioned that she was having trouble finding work that matched her creative vision, our parents immediately offered her a position as the lifestyle coordinator at Hayes & Associates. The position was created specifically for Trinity and had no clear job description beyond helping clients visualize the lifestyle potential of properties. In practical terms, it meant she got paid a substantial salary to pose in photos for marketing materials and attend networking events where she could charm potential clients with stories about New York Fashion Week. There was just one problem. I had been hoping to formalize my relationship with Hayes & Associates by taking on some of their higher-end development projects. For months, Dad had been encouraging me to submit proposals for luxury home renovations and commercial development projects that came through the agency. I'd spent considerable time and money developing comprehensive plans for several significant properties. But when Trinity expressed interest in exploring the intersection of fashion and real estate, suddenly those opportunities were redirected to give Trinity a portfolio of successful projects she could claim credit for. "Family helps family," Dad explained when I asked about the projects I'd been working on for months. "Trinity needs these opportunities to rebuild her confidence after everything she's been through in New York. Your business is already established and successful." The most infuriating part wasn't losing the contracts, it was watching Trinity fumble through projects that required technical expertise she didn't possess. She had no background in construction, no understanding of zoning laws or building codes, and no genuine interest in the practical aspects of development work. But she was photogenic enough to convince clients that she was learning, and our parents were invested enough in her success to hire actual professionals to do the work while she took credit for the results. I started distancing myself from family events and focusing entirely on my own client base. If they wanted to hand Trinity opportunities based on nepotism rather than merit, that was their prerogative. But I wasn't going to stand around watching my expertise be diminished to boost my sister's undeserved confidence. The situation reached a breaking point in June when I was offered a contract to develop a luxury eco-resort on a pristine piece of lakefront property that had been owned by the same family for generations. It was exactly the kind of high-profile, environmentally conscious project that could establish me as one of New England's premier sustainable developers, prestigious, profitable, and technically challenging in all the ways that would showcase my unique approach to balancing luxury with environmental responsibility. I was excited to share the news with my family during our weekly Sunday dinner, thinking they'd finally recognize that my business had evolved beyond small-scale renovations into something truly significant. Instead, the conversation took a turn that I should have seen coming. "That's wonderful, Autumn," Mom said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But Trinity has been working so hard to establish herself in luxury property development. Maybe this would be a good opportunity for you two to collaborate." Collaborate? How? I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. "Well, you could handle the technical and environmental aspects while Trinity manages the luxury lifestyle marketing and client relations. It would be perfect for both of you to expand your skill sets and work together as a family." I stared at them across the dinner table, trying to process what they were suggesting. They wanted me to give Trinity co-ownership of a project I'd earned based on my own reputation, a project that required technical expertise she didn't possess, so she could add luxury resort developer to her resume without actually learning how to develop anything. "This is my contract," I said carefully. "The clients specifically requested me based on my portfolio of sustainable development projects. They want someone who can balance luxury amenities with environmental conservation." "Of course," Mom said quickly, "but think about how much stronger your proposal would be if you could offer comprehensive lifestyle consulting services. Trinity's background in fashion and luxury markets would bring so much value to a high-end resort project." Trinity, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. "I don't want to take credit for Autumn's work," she said in the sweet, reasonable tone she used when she was about to ask for something significant. "But I would love to learn more about luxury hospitality development. Maybe I could help with the interior design concepts, coordinate with lifestyle vendors, handle the marketing strategy." It sounded reasonable on the surface, but I knew exactly how these collaborations worked in my family. Trinity would start with supportive secondary tasks, gradually take on more visible aspects of the project, and eventually be credited as co-developer on a resort that I'd designed and managed from start to finish. By the time we opened, it would be Trinity's resort project with technical support from Autumn. But refusing would make me the selfish sister who wouldn't help family succeed, who was too proud to share opportunities with someone who just needed a chance to prove herself. "Fine," I said, already regretting the decision, but unable to figure out how to refuse without looking petty. "But this is my project, my clients, my timeline, my design standards. You can help with marketing and interior concepts, but I make all the final decisions about development and construction." "Of course," Trinity said, flashing the brilliant smile that had gotten her out of trouble since childhood. "I'm just grateful for the chance to learn from someone as talented and successful as you." The resort development project became a nightmare within weeks. Trinity had no understanding of the complexity involved in balancing luxury amenities with environmental conservation. She'd show up to client meetings unprepared, if at all, and spend more time taking Instagram photos of herself at the property than actually contributing to planning discussions. When she did try to provide input, her suggestions revealed a complete lack of understanding about sustainable development principles. She wanted to clear-cut mature trees for better lake views and install a massive heated pool that would require environmentally destructive infrastructure. But the worst part was how she presented the project to other people. She'd post photos on social media with captions like, "Designing my dream eco-resort," attend industry networking events talking about my latest luxury development project, and even scheduled meetings with potential investors without consulting me to discuss her vision for sustainable luxury hospitality. When I confronted her about these overreaches, she acted hurt and confused, like I was being unreasonably territorial about a project she genuinely believed she co-owned. "I thought we were partners on this," she said with tears in her eyes during one particularly frustrating conversation. "I'm just trying to be professional and engaged with our clients and investors. Isn't that what you wanted when you asked for my help with marketing?" "I wanted help with marketing materials and interior design concepts," I said firmly. "Not for you to present yourself as a co-developer when you can't tell the difference between sustainable building materials and regular construction supplies." "I'm learning," she protested, "and I bring valuable skills to this project that you don't have. Not everyone can connect with luxury resort clients the way I can. I understand their lifestyle expectations." That was partially true. Trinity was naturally gifted at making wealthy clients feel understood and valued, skills that didn't come easily to me. But those social skills didn't make her a developer, and they didn't entitle her to credit for technical work she couldn't perform. The situation reached a crisis point in August when the eco-resort clients came to Clearwater Springs to tour the property and review our development plans. I'd been working 18-hour days for weeks to create detailed environmental impact studies, sustainable construction plans, and luxury amenity designs that would satisfy both the client's desire for comfort and the strict environmental regulations governing lakefront development. But when Mr. and Mrs. Richardson arrived for the site meeting, Trinity was already at the property, dressed in designer hiking clothes that never touched actual dirt, explaining our development philosophy and taking credit for design innovations she'd never seen me create. "Your sister is remarkable," Mrs. Richardson told me privately, while Trinity posed for photos with architectural plans she couldn't read. "She has such a sophisticated understanding of luxury hospitality development and such a clear vision for balancing comfort with environmental responsibility." I watched Trinity gesture enthusiastically while describing sustainable building techniques she'd learned from my presentations, and something inside me finally snapped. Actually, Trinity isn't a developer. She's been helping with marketing concepts, but all the environmental planning, construction design, and development work is mine. Mrs. Richardson looked confused. "But she's been sending us detailed updates about the permitting process, the sustainable infrastructure plans, the luxury amenity integration." My heart sunk. I'd asked Trinity to handle client communications, but I hadn't realized she'd been writing those updates as if she'd performed the technical work herself. "I think there's been some confusion on roles on this project," I said diplomatically. "I can provide you with a detailed breakdown of exactly what work has been completed and who performed each aspect of the development planning." That evening, my family convened for what became the most explosive argument we'd ever had. "You humiliated Trinity in front of our clients," Mom said, her voice tight with anger. "She's been working so hard to contribute to this project, and you made her look incompetent in front of people who could make or break her career in development." "She is incompetent," I said, too exhausted to continue pretending otherwise. "She can't perform any of the technical work she's been taking credit for, and she's been lying to our clients about her role in the project." "She hasn't been lying," Dad said firmly. "She's been learning and contributing in ways that might not be as visible as drawing blueprints, but are equally valuable to the project's success."
Taking credit for environmental impact studies she's never read isn't valuable contribution. It's fraud.
Trinity, who had been crying quietly in the corner of our parents' living room, finally spoke up. Autumn, I never meant to take credit for your work. I was just trying to show the clients that we're a professional development team. I thought you'd be proud that they were impressed with our collaboration. There is no collaboration, I shouted, causing all of them to stare at me in shock. I had never raised my voice at my family before. There's me doing the technical work and you pretending to understand it well enough to explain it to clients. That's not partnership, that's impersonation. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my parents looking at each other, trying to figure out how to make this my fault, rather than acknowledging that their golden child had been lying to paying clients for months. Maybe, Mom said carefully, you could be more generous about sharing recognition. Trinity has brought tremendous value to this project, even if it's not the kind of work that gets your name on technical documents. I stared at her, this woman who had raised me to value honesty and hard work, and realized that those principles only applied when they didn't conflict with Trinity's immediate needs. Fine, I said, standing up to leave. Trinity can have all the recognition she wants. She can finish the development project herself. Autumn, don't be ridiculous, Dad said. You can't just abandon a project halfway through. I'm not abandoning anything. I'm removing myself from a situation where my work is being misrepresented and my expertise is being appropriated by someone with no qualifications. As I headed for the door, I heard Trinity call after me. Autumn, wait, don't leave like this. We can work this out. I turned back to look at my sister, this woman who looked so much like me that we'd been mistaken for twins throughout our childhood, and felt like I was seeing a stranger. No, Trinity, we can't work this out, because you don't want to work with me. You want to use me to build a career you haven't earned, and I'm done enabling that. Then finish the project yourself, she said, her voice suddenly cold in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I've been working without family support my entire career. The only difference now is that I won't be sharing credit with someone who doesn't deserve it. I walked out of their house that night knowing that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. I was done being the responsible sister who cleaned up messes and shared credit for accomplishments. I was done pretending that Trinity's social skills were equivalent to my technical expertise. But I had no idea how far she'd go to punish me for that decision. 2 weeks later, I was working late in my home office, reviewing final permitting documents for the eco-resort project that I'd decided to complete entirely on my own, when I heard someone calling my name from outside. I looked out my window and saw Trinity standing in my backyard, looking up at my second-story office with tears streaming down her face. Autumn, please, she called. I need to talk to you. I know I messed up, but we're family. We can't let this project destroy our relationship. Against my better judgment, I went downstairs and opened my back door. Trinity was standing at the bottom of the external staircase that led up to my roof deck, still crying and looking more distressed than I had ever seen her. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She wanted to apologize for everything, for taking credit for your work, for lying to the clients, for making you feel like I was trying to steal your success. I felt terrible about our fight, and I couldn't sleep knowing you think I don't care about you. Trinity, it's almost midnight. This could have waited for tomorrow. No, it couldn't, she said urgently. I've been sitting in my car for hours trying to work up the courage to knock on your door. Please, can we just talk? Up on your roof deck where we used to hang out when we were kids. Like old times. The mention of our childhood memories should have been a red flag, but I was exhausted from weeks of family drama and genuinely hoped that maybe Trinity was finally ready to acknowledge what she'd done wrong. "Okay," I said, "but just for a few minutes. I have an early meeting tomorrow."
I led the way up the external staircase to my roof deck, a space I'd designed with comfortable outdoor furniture and string lights that created a peaceful atmosphere for evening relaxation. Trinity followed behind me, and for a moment it felt like we might actually have the honest conversation we'd never been able to have before. We stood at the edge of the deck, looking out over Clearwater Lake glittering in the moonlight, and Trinity began what sounded like a genuine apology. She said, standing just behind me while I leaned against the railing, "I know I've been terrible to you. I know I've taken advantage of your generosity and made you feel like your work doesn't matter. I was jealous of how successful you've become, and I handled it in the worst way possible. Trinity, She interrupted, moving closer behind me. "I want you to know that I realize now how much damage I've caused, how much I've hurt you, and I want to make it right." I felt her hands on my back, and for a split second I thought she was going to hug me. Then she pushed. Hard. I went over the railing and felt 20 feet onto the stone patio below, landing with a sickening crack that I later learned was my left arm breaking in 3 places. The impact knocked me unconscious immediately.
When I woke up in the hospital 12 hours later, my mother was sitting beside my bed, holding my uninjured hand and crying. "Oh, sweetheart," she said when she saw my eyes open. "Thank God you're awake. We were so scared we might lose you." "What happened?" I asked groggily, my throat raw and my entire body throbbing with pain. "You fell from your roof deck," Mom said, squeezing my hand. "Trinity found you when she came to apologize for your argument. She said you must have been leaning against the railing and it gave way. These old houses, you know how the railings can rot without anyone noticing." Through my medication haze, I tried to remember what had happened. I recalled Trinity calling my name from the yard, going up to the roof deck, standing at the railing, talking about apologies and making things right. But the actual moment of falling was a blank space in my memory, lost to the concussion that had accompanied my 20-foot drop onto stone. "Where is Trinity now?" I asked. "She's in the waiting room with your father. She's been here all night, blaming herself for not getting here sooner to prevent the accident. She keeps saying she should have noticed the railing was unsafe when she came to talk to you." The police report listed the cause as accidental fall due to structural failure of the roof deck railing. The insurance company paid out without question. Everyone agreed it was a tragic accident that could have happened to anyone living in an old house with aging infrastructure. Everyone except me. Because as the days passed and my concussion symptoms faded, fragments of memory began returning, and what I remembered didn't match the story everyone was telling about a railing that had given way under my weight. What I remembered was the feeling of hands on my back. What I remembered was being pushed over the edge. 3 weeks after the accident, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the story everyone kept telling me. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt those hands on my back, not the sensation of falling against a failing railing, but the deliberate pressure of someone pushing me over the edge of my roof deck. But every time I mentioned this to the doctors, nurses, or my family, I got the same response. Head injuries can cause false memories. Concussions make people imagine things that didn't happen. Trauma can make accidents feel more sinister than they actually were. It's completely normal to feel confused about what happened. Dr. Phillips, the neurologist overseeing my recovery, assured me during one of my follow-up appointments. The brain's way of processing traumatic events isn't always accurate. What matters is that you're healing well physically. I was healing well physically. My broken arm was mending properly, my concussion symptoms were mostly gone, and the bruises from my 20-foot fall onto stone were fading from purple to yellow. But mentally, I felt like I was losing my mind. Because the more I thought about that night, the more impossible the official story became. I'd had my roof deck railing inspected and reinforced just 6 months earlier as part of a comprehensive safety upgrade to my property.
The contractor, Mike Sullivan, was someone I'd worked with on multiple development projects, a perfectionist who took structural safety seriously and had never cut corners on any job I'd hired him for. During my 4th week of recovery, while my family was at work and I was alone in my apartment for the first time since the accident, I called Mike. "Autumn, how are you feeling?" he asked when he answered, his voice full of genuine concern. "I heard about your fall. Scared the hell out of all of us contractors when we found out someone got hurt on a deck we'd worked on." "Mike, I need to ask you about the railing inspection you did on my roof deck last spring. Do you remember what it was in?" There was a pause. "Autumn, that railing was solid as a rock. I reinforced every connection point and replaced 3 of the support posts with new pressure-treated lumber. I documented everything with photos because I was proud of how clean that job came out." My hand started shaking. "Are you saying there's no way it could have failed under normal circumstances?" "Not a chance. That railing could have supported 3 people leaning against it simultaneously. I stake my reputation on the work I do." His voice became more concerned. "Why? Is someone saying the failure was due to faulty construction?" I thanked Mike and hung up without explaining, but his words confirmed what my returning memories had been telling me. The railing hadn't failed because it couldn't fail. Someone had pushed me over it. That afternoon, I drove to my house for the first time since the accident. My parents had offered to pack up anything I needed and had been actively discouraging me from returning to the scene of my traumatic fall. But I needed to see the roof deck for myself. What I found made my blood run cold. The railing was intact. Not just intact, but exactly as solid and secure as Mike had described. There were no signs of structural failure, no broken connections, no rotted wood. The railing hadn't failed because someone had fallen against it. It had done exactly what railings are supposed to do, remain firmly in place. But if the railing hadn't failed, how was everyone explaining my fall? I called the investigator who had processed my claim, a woman named Carol Martinez, who had apparently visited my property the day after my accident. "Miss Hayes, good to hear from you," she said when I identified myself. "How's your recovery going?" "I'm doing better, thank you. I had a question about your investigation report. You concluded that I fell due to railing failure, but I just visited my property and the railing appears to be intact."
There was a long silence. "I'm sorry, Miss Hayes, but I think there might be some confusion. My report concluded that you fell accidentally, but not due to railing failure. According to the police report and witness statements, you lost your balance and went over the railing, which remained structurally sound." "Witness statements?" "Your sister provided a detailed account of finding you after the fall. She explained that she'd arrived to apologize for a family argument and found you unconscious on the patio. She assumed you'd been leaning against the railing, perhaps lost your balance, and accidentally went over." I stared at my phone, trying to process what Carol was telling me. For 3 weeks, my family had been explaining my injuries by claiming the railing had failed, but the official investigation had never reached that conclusion. Did anyone examine my clothing or look for physical evidence of what might have caused the fall? "The police took photographs and collected your clothing for evidence, but since there were no signs of foul play, and you had a witness who found you immediately after the accident, it was treated as a straightforward accidental fall case." After I hung up, I sat in my car in front of my own house, trying to understand why my family had been lying to me about the cause of my accident. Why tell me the railing had failed when the investigators knew it hadn't? Why create a false narrative about structural problems when the official report documented something entirely different? Unless they needed to explain away evidence that pointed to something else other than an accident. That evening, I went to my parents' house without calling first. I found them in their study, going over real estate contracts, looking comfortable and relaxed in a way that felt obscene, considering their daughter had nearly died 3 weeks earlier. "Autumn, sweetheart," Mom said when she saw me, immediately standing to hug me carefully around my cast. "What a wonderful surprise. How are you feeling?" "I went to my house today. I looked at the roof deck railing.
The change in both their expressions was immediate and unmistakable. Dad's face went pale, Mom's smile became strained and artificial. "Oh, honey, you shouldn't be putting yourself through that," Mom said quickly. "Revisiting the scene of a traumatic accident can be very upsetting. What did Dr. Phillips say about emotional recovery?" "The railing didn't fail," I said, watching their faces carefully. "It's completely intact, solid as the day it was installed." "Of course it's intact now," Dad said, but his voice sounded forced. "The insurance company had it repaired immediately after the accident, standard procedure for liability purposes." I called the insurance investigator. She said her report never mentioned railing failure. She said, "You told the police I lost my balance and went over a structurally sound railing." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them looking at each other, having one of those wordless conversations that long-married couples master, trying to figure out how to handle this crisis. "Rachel, you're still recovering from a serious head injury," Mom said finally. "It's natural to feel confused about the details. The important thing is that you're healing and safe now." But it was too late. Trinity had just admitted to deliberately pushing me off the roof deck. The only question now was whether she was telling the truth about only intending to scare me, or whether she'd hoped the 20-foot fall onto stone would kill me outright. I walked out of their house and drove straight to the emergency room where I'd been treated after my fall. If I really did have handprint evidence on my back, if Trinity's fingerprints were still embedded in bruises that had been photographed during my initial emergency room treatment 3 weeks ago, then I had proof that someone deliberately pushed me off that roof deck. And if I had that proof, then my family's weeks of lies and cover-up attempts were about to come to an end. For 26 years, I'd been the understanding sister, the one who cleaned up messes and accepted blame. But I was done being understanding about attempted murder. It was time to find out exactly what the evidence could prove. Dr. Janet Morrison at Clearwater General Hospital looked exactly like what I had expected a forensic medical examiner to look like. Mid-50s, practical clothes, sharp eyes that missed nothing as she reviewed the photographs that had been taken of my injuries during my initial emergency room treatment 3 weeks earlier. "Miss Hayes, I want to be completely transparent with you about what we're dealing with," Dr. Morrison said as she spread the photos across her desk. "When you were brought in after your fall, the emergency room staff documented all your injuries with standard trauma photography. What they captured may be the key evidence in determining what happened to you was an accident or something else entirely." I had driven straight from my parents' house to the hospital, Trinity's confession still ringing in my ears. "It was never supposed to seriously hurt you. I just wanted to scare you." The admission that she had deliberately pushed me off the roof, even if she claimed it was only meant to frighten me, was attempted murder in my mind. But I needed proof that would hold up in court. The emergency room photos show extensive bruising on your back, concentrated in 2 specific areas that correspond to hand placement. Dr. Morrison continued, pointing to images that made my stomach turn. The bruises were darker and more extensive than I had realized, covering areas from my shoulder blades down to my lower ribs. "Can you determine if those bruises were caused by hands pushing me?" "That's exactly what I'm trained to analyze. The pattern, depth, and distribution of the bruising is completely consistent with someone placing their hands flat against your back and exerting significant forward pressure. What's particularly telling is that there are no corresponding defensive wounds on your arms or hands, which we'd expect to see if you'd been grabbing for something to break your fall." She pulled out a magnifying glass and showed me details I hadn't noticed in the original photos. "See these finger-shaped marks here and here? The spacing and pressure patterns suggest someone with relatively small hands, likely a woman around your sister's size, pushed you with considerable force. Is this enough evidence to prove I was pushed rather than falling accidentally?" Dr. Morrison nodded grimly. "In my professional opinion, these injuries are entirely inconsistent with an accidental fall. Someone deliberately pushed you off that roof deck with enough force to send you over a 3-foot railing." After our meeting, Dr. Morrison connected me with Detective Sarah Chen from the Clearwater Springs Police Department. Detective Chen specialized in assault cases and had experience with family violence situations that often involved victims who were pressured to protect their attackers. "Miss Hayes, before we begin a formal investigation, I need you to understand what you're potentially facing," Detective Chen said during our first meeting at the police station. "If your sister deliberately pushed you off a roof deck, that's attempted murder in the first degree, But family assault cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute, especially when the family has resources and community standing. What does that mean for me? It means your family will likely hire expensive attorneys who will argue that your sister was trying to help you when you accidentally lost your balance. They'll claim the handprint evidence shows her attempting to grab you, not push you. They'll question your memory, your mental state, and your motives for pursuing charges. And if I don't pursue charges? Detective Chen leaned forward. Then someone who tried to kill you faces no consequences, and you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that your family protected an attempted murderer. The choice is yours, but I want you to have all the information before you decide. I thought about Trinity's confession, her admission that she had deliberately pushed me to scare me and make me realize that actions have consequences. I thought about my parents' immediate lies about railing failure, their weeks of maintaining a false narrative to protect her from investigation. I want to press charges, I said. I want a full investigation. Over the next several days, Detective Chen walked me through the process of building a criminal case. We reviewed the hospital records, the insurance investigation, and the timeline of events leading up to my fall. She was particularly interested in the eco-resort project conflict and Trinity's pattern of appropriating credit for work she couldn't perform. Motive is crucial in attempted murder cases, Detective Chen explained. We need to establish that your sister had compelling reasons to want you seriously harmed or dead. The business rivalry, the public embarrassment with clients, the threat to her ability to continue taking credit for your work, it all builds a picture of escalating conflict that could drive someone to violence. But the most important evidence came from forensic analysis of the photographs. Dr. Morrison had sent the images to a specialist lab that used advanced imaging technology to analyze the handprint patterns in my bruising. The results were devastating for Trinity's claims of innocence. The lab was able to enhance the images enough to identify specific fingerprint ridge patterns in the deeper bruises. Detective Chen reported during our follow-up meeting, "We now have a warrant to collect your sister's fingerprints for comparison. If they match the patterns embedded in your injuries, we'll have physical proof that she pushed you." What if she refuses to provide fingerprints? She can't refuse. We have probable cause based on the medical evidence and her own admissions to you about being present during the incident. If she doesn't cooperate voluntarily, we'll arrest her and collect the prints during booking. The fingerprint collection happened 2 days later. I wasn't present for it, but Detective Chen called me that afternoon with the results. "Perfect match," she said without preamble. "Your sister's fingerprints are embedded in the bruising on your back in a pattern completely consistent with forceful pushing. Combined with her confession to you about deliberately causing your fall, we have probable cause for attempted murder charges." I sat down heavily in my apartment kitchen, overwhelmed by the relief of finally having concrete proof that I hadn't imagined or misremembered what had happened to me. What happens now? We arrest your sister and charge her with attempted murder in the first degree. Given the severity of the charges and the physical evidence, it's likely she'll be held without bail pending trial. That evening, my phone started ringing constantly. Word had apparently gotten out that I was cooperating with a police investigation into my accident, and my extended family was calling to express their shock and dismay. My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, called first. "Autumn, honey, what's this I hear about police getting involved in your accident? Your parents are beside themselves with worry." "It wasn't an accident, Aunt Patricia. Trinity pushed me off the roof deck, and my parents have been covering it up." "That's impossible, sweetheart. Trinity would never hurt you. She loves you. You know how head injuries can affect memory and judgment. Maybe you should talk to a counselor before you do something you'll regret." The calls continued throughout the evening. Cousins, family friends, business associates, all expressing concern about my mental state and my vindictive pursuit of charges against my own sister. None of them asked how I was doing or whether I needed support. They were all focused on protecting Trinity from the consequences of her actions. The most painful call came from my grandmother, my mother's 83-year-old mother who had always been my favorite relative. "Autumn, dear, my mother told me about this terrible misunderstanding with the police. Surely you don't really believe Trinity tried to hurt you. She's been like a granddaughter to me. I can't bear the thought of her going to prison over an accident."
"It wasn't an accident, Grandma. She admitted to pushing me.
There's forensic evidence proving she did it. But families protect each other, dear. That's what we do. We don't send each other to prison. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive whatever happened and let this family heal? After I hung up, I realized that I was completely alone in seeking justice for what had been done to me. Every single person in my family was more concerned about protecting Trinity than supporting the victim of her attempted murder. That's when I called Dr. Lisa Warren, a therapist who specialized in trauma and family violence. Detective Chen had recommended her after one of our sessions when I'd broken down crying while describing the pressure I was getting from relatives. Autumn, Dr. Warren said during our first session, what you're describing is a textbook example of family scapegoating and victim blaming. Your family has trained you to prioritize their emotional needs over your own safety and well-being. They're more invested in maintaining their image and protecting their preferred family member than they are in seeking justice when crimes are committed against you. But they're still my family, I said, voicing the guilt that had been eating at me since I'd decided to press charges. Despite everything, part of me still loves them. Love and accountability aren't mutually exclusive, Dr. Warren said. You can love your sister while still insisting that she face consequences for trying to kill you. You can care about your parents while refusing to enable their protection of a dangerous person. Dr. Warren helped me understand that my guilt about pursuing the investigation wasn't just natural family loyalty, it was the result of years of conditioning that had taught me to prioritize everyone else's comfort over my own survival. What would you tell a friend who was in your situation? She asked during one session. I'd tell them to pursue the investigation and seek justice. So why are you holding yourself to a different standard? I couldn't answer that question, but it made me realize how much of my hesitation was based on ingrained patterns rather than rational decision-making. 3 weeks after I'd first walked into the police station, Detective Chen called with the news I'd been both expecting and dreading. We're ready to make an arrest, she said. The forensic evidence is conclusive. We have her recorded confession from your phone when you confronted her, and the motive is clearly established. The district attorney believes we have a strong case for attempted murder in the first degree. Recorded confession? You called me right after your confrontation with your family, remember? You were upset and wanted to document what Trinity had said while it was fresh in your memory. That phone call was recorded, and Trinity's admission that she deliberately pushed you to scare you is clear evidence of intent to cause harm. I had forgotten about that phone call in my emotional turmoil, but Detective Chen was right. In my shock after Trinity's confession, I'd called the police to report what she had said, creating an official record of her admission. What happens now? We arrest your sister. She'll be booked, arraigned, and either held or released on bail, depending on what the judge decides. Your family will probably try one more time to pressure you into dropping the charges. But at this point, it's out of your hands. The state is prosecuting this case, whether you cooperate or not. The arrest happened the next morning. Detective Chen called to let me know it had gone smoothly. Trinity had been taken into custody at my parents' house without incident and was being held pending her arraignment. Within hours, the local news was covering the story. Local woman arrested for attempted murder of sister. The article mentioned our family's real estate business, the details of my fall, and the forensic evidence that had led to the charges. My parents' first response was to release a statement through their attorney claiming that I was mentally unstable due to my head injury and that the charges were based on false accusations made by someone suffering from trauma-induced delusions. Their second response was to show up at my apartment. I found them on my doorstep at 7 a.m, looking like they had aged 10 years overnight. Mom was clutching a box of tissues, and Dad looked like he hadn't slept in days. Autumn, we need to talk, Dad said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Trinity is in jail. She's being held without bail on attempted murder charges. Do you understand what that means? It means she's facing consequences for trying to kill me, I said, not inviting them inside. She didn't try to kill you, Mom said desperately. She made a terrible mistake in judgment, but she never intended to seriously hurt you. 25 to life in prison is not proportional to a momentary lapse in judgment. A momentary lapse in judgment? She pushed me off a 20-foot roof deck onto a stone patio. I could have died. But you didn't die. You survived, you're recovering, you're building a successful life. Sending Trinity to prison for decades won't change what happened. It will prevent her from pushing someone else off a roof when they make her angry. They spent the next hour alternating between emotional manipulation and thinly veiled threats. They talked about how the arrest had damaged their real estate business, how they might lose their house paying for Trinity's legal defense, how the community was turning against them because of the publicity. None of it moved me. "You've made your choice," I said finally. "You chose to protect someone who tried to kill me instead of seeking justice for your daughter who was nearly murdered. I have to live with the consequences of that choice every day. Now you get to live with them too." After they left, I realized that somewhere in the past month, I'd stopped caring whether my family approved of my decisions. The constant anxiety that had characterized my relationship with them for 26 years had been replaced with something I'd never experienced before: confidence in my own moral judgment.
I wasn't being vindictive or cruel. I wasn't destroying my family over a misunderstanding. I was finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of being exploited and manipulated by people who saw my well-being as less important than their own comfort. 2 weeks later, I attended Trinity's arraignment. She looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, more fragile than the confident woman who had tried to charm her way out of responsibility our entire lives. When the judge read the charges, attempted murder in the first degree, I saw her shoulders shake with sobs. But I felt no sympathy for her tears. She'd had weeks to confess, to take responsibility, to show genuine remorse for what she'd done. Instead, she'd continued lying, enlisted our parents in a campaign to make me doubt my own perceptions, and only admitted the truth when confronted with overwhelming evidence. When the judge denied bail, citing the severity of the charges and Trinity's apparent lack of remorse, I heard my mother gasp from the gallery. I turned around to see my parents sitting together, looking devastated and older than I'd ever seen them. They'd mortgaged their home to hire expensive attorneys for Trinity. They'd spent their savings on expert witnesses and private investigators. They'd destroyed their reputation in the community by publicly defending someone accused of attempted murder, all to protect the daughter who had tried to kill me. As I left the courthouse, I realized that I'd finally become the person I was meant to be instead of the person my family needed me to be. I was no longer the understanding sister who absorbed blame and shared credit. I was no longer the victim who prioritized everyone else's comfort over her own safety. I was a survivor who had chosen justice over family harmony, truth over convenient lies, and my own well-being over the preservation of relationships built on exploitation and abuse. And for the first time in 26 years, that felt like enough. 7 months later, I stood in the hallway outside courtroom 2B in the Cumberland County Courthouse, watching my family huddle together on a wooden bench like survivors of a natural disaster. My mother clutched a crumpled tissue in her white-knuckled fist. My father stared at the marble floor with vacant eyes, and between them sat Trinity in a navy blue blazer that her attorney had chosen to make her look innocent and remorseful. She was about to face sentencing for attempted murder in the first degree. The jury had deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning with a guilty verdict that surprised no one who had been following the evidence. The forensic proof was overwhelming, the recorded confession was damning, and her performance on the witness stand had only made her look more guilty as she continued to lie under oath. I wasn't there to support her. I was there to make sure the judge understood exactly what she'd tried to take from me that night on the roof deck. Assistant District Attorney Michael Rodriguez had explained that victim impact statements were my opportunity to tell the court how Trinity's crimes had affected my life. He'd warned me that my family would probably be in the courtroom and that hearing what I had to say might be the final severing of whatever relationship we had left. "You don't have to do this," he'd said during our final preparation meeting. "The conviction speaks for itself. The evidence was so strong that the judge has all the information she needs for sentencing." "I want to do it," I'd replied.
For 26 years, no one has ever asked how her actions affected me. Today, someone finally will. Now, standing in that courthouse hallway, I watched my parents notice me for the first time since Trinity's arrest 7 months earlier. My mother's face crumpled with fresh tears, my father's expression hardened with the same bitter resentment he'd carried since I'd refused to drop the charges. And Trinity looked at me with something I'd never seen from her before, genuine fear of consequences she couldn't charm her way out of. The courtroom was more imposing than I had expected from the preliminary hearings. Judge Elizabeth Morrison presided from behind a massive mahogany bench, her gray hair pulled back severely, and her steel blue eyes missing nothing as she reviewed the sentencing guidelines. The prosecutor had prepared me for what to expect, but sitting in the gallery looking out at my family felt like attending a funeral for relationships that had died months ago. Judge Morrison reviewed the case methodically. Attempted murder in the first degree, premeditated, evidence of clear intent to cause serious bodily harm, multiple attempts to cover up the crime and manipulate the victim into protecting the perpetrator. Each detail felt like a vindication of my decision to seek justice, proof that Trinity's actions were far more serious than the family misunderstanding my parents had desperately tried to convince everyone to believe. Before I impose sentence, Judge Morrison said, the court will hear a victim impact statement from Autumn Hayes, the defendant's sister and the target of this attempted murder. I walked to the podium on legs that felt steadier than I had expected, acutely aware of my parents' eyes on my back. I'd written and rewritten my statement dozens of times, but now, standing before the judge with Trinity in handcuffs 20 feet away, I set aside my prepared remarks and spoke from the heart. Your Honor, my name is Autumn Hayes, and Trinity Hayes is my sister. For most of my life, that relationship has defined me in ways that I'm only now beginning to understand. I glanced at my family, then back at the judge. When I was 5 years old, my sister broke something valuable and told our parents I was responsible. I was punished for her action. This pattern continued throughout our childhood and into our adult lives. Trinity would make destructive decisions, and somehow, the responsibility for managing the consequences would fall to me. My mother made a soft sound of protest from the gallery, but I didn't turn around.
The attempted murder that brings us here today wasn't an isolated incident or a moment of rage. It was the culmination of years of escalating control and manipulation. When I finally set boundaries and refused to let her take credit for professional work she couldn't perform, she decided that pushing me off a roof deck was an appropriate response to my independence. For 3 weeks after Trinity pushed me off my roof deck, while I recovered from a broken arm, concussion, and extensive bruising that could have been fatal injuries, my family convinced me that what happened was an accident. They comforted me, supported me, and helped me process the trauma of what I believed was a structural failure. What I didn't know was that my sister had tried to murder me, and my parents had immediately begun covering it up. Judge Morrison nodded for me to continue. Your Honor, this case isn't just about attempted murder. It's about a woman who spent the night researching exactly where on my property she could push me from the greatest height, who called me at midnight with a false apology specifically designed to get me onto that roof deck, and who then used the trust I'd placed in her as my sister to get close enough to commit attempted murder. I looked directly at Trinity for the first time since entering the courtroom. She was crying, but her tears no longer had any effect on me. When I discovered evidence that my fall wasn't accidental and confronted my family with proof, their first response wasn't shock or demands for justice. It was anger that I was destroying the family by refusing to protect my attempted murderer from consequences. They spent months trying to convince me that seeking justice for attempted murder made me vindictive and cruel. I returned my gaze to the judge. Your Honor, this case isn't just about attempted murder. It's about a woman who spent the night researching exactly where on my property she could push me from the greatest height, who called me at midnight with a false apology specifically designed to get me onto that roof deck,
and who then used the trust I'd placed in her as my sister to get close enough to commit attempted murder. I returned to my seat in the gallery, sitting as far from my family as possible. Judge Morrison took several minutes to review her notes and the evidence before addressing Trinity directly. Miss Hayes, the crime you committed represents one of the most serious violations of trust and human decency I've encountered in 15 years on the bench. You didn't just attempt to murder another person, you attempted to murder your own sister, someone who trusted you enough to meet with you alone at midnight to discuss personal conflicts. Trinity nodded through her tears, but I could see she was still performing rather than feeling genuine remorse. The evidence shows that this was not a crime of passion or temporary mental breakdown. You planned this attack. You researched the layout of your sister's property. You deliberately chose a time and location that would maximize the chance of serious injury or death. The judge's voice grew harder. Perhaps most disturbing is your complete lack of genuine accountability. Throughout this trial, you've maintained that pushing your sister off a roof deck was somehow justified by business disputes. You've shown no real empathy for your victim and no understanding of how close you came to committing murder. Judge Morrison opened her sentencing folder. The court sentences you to 22 years in the Maine State Prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. You are also ordered to pay restitution for medical expenses, property damage, and psychological counseling costs. And you are permanently prohibited from contacting your sister or coming within 500 feet of her residence or business. 22 years. More than I dared to hope for, and exactly what Trinity deserved for trying to kill me. As the bailiff led Trinity away, she turned back one last time to look at my parents, then at me. I saw her mouth the words, "I'm sorry," but they felt as empty as all her previous apologies had proven to be. Some crimes were too profound for apologies, and some people were too dangerous to forgive. Outside the courthouse, my parents were waiting for me by the stone steps. My mother's face was ravaged by months of stress and crying, and my father looked like he'd lost everything that mattered to him. "Are you satisfied now?" Dad asked, his voice hollow rather than angry. "Your sister is going to prison for 22 years because of you." "She's going to prison because she tried to kill me," I replied calmly. "I didn't make her lure me onto that roof deck. I didn't make her push me over the railing. I didn't make her lie about it for months afterwards." "She made a terrible mistake," Mom said, her voice breaking. "But 22 years? She'll be 48 when she's eligible for parole. Her entire life is over." "My life would have been over if I hit my head instead of my arm when I landed. She gambled with my life, and now she's paying the consequences." Dad stepped closer, but not with the threatening energy he'd shown during our earlier confrontations. He looked defeated, broken by the reality of what his family had become. "We've lost everything," he said quietly. "The business is bankrupt from legal fees, we've lost the house. Half the community won't speak to us because of the publicity. And now Trinity is gone for 2 decades. You lost everything when you decided to cover up attempted murder. I didn't cause this. I just refused to be a victim." Mom reached out as if to touch my arm, then stopped herself. "Autumn, I know you're angry with us. I know we handled this badly, but we're still family. Doesn't that count for something?"
A college roommate who reported her for academic dishonesty fell down a flight of stairs under suspicious circumstances, and a coworker in New York who got a promotion Trinity wanted was seriously injured when she accidentally fell in front of a subway train. Both survived, but both incidents now look like attempted murder in light of your case. The revelation that I hadn't been Trinity's first victim was both validating and horrifying. If I hadn't pushed for an investigation, if I'd accepted the accident explanation and tried to heal the family, she might have continued trying to kill people who frustrated or threatened her. Is she facing additional charges? The other jurisdictions are reviewing their evidence. It's possible she'll be facing more attempted murder charges, which could extend her sentence significantly.
After I hung up, I sat in my loft looking out at Portland's skyline, thinking about the person I'd been 18 months ago, accommodating, desperate for family approval, willing to sacrifice anything to maintain harmony. Then I thought about the woman I'd become, confident, independent, surrounded by people who valued me for my integrity rather than my willingness to absorb abuse. The transformation hadn't been easy. Breaking free from family patterns that had been established over decades required courage I didn't know I possessed. But every difficult conversation, every boundary I'd set, every moment I'd chosen my own well-being over someone else's convenience had been worth it. 6 months later, I received a letter from Trinity, forwarded through my attorney since I'd made it clear I wanted no direct contact. In it, she wrote about how sorry she was, how prison had given her time to think about the damage she'd caused, how she hoped someday I could find it in my heart to forgive her. She promised to never bother me again when she got out, to get help for her problems, to somehow make amends for what she'd done. I read it once, then shredded it without responding. Some crimes couldn't be forgiven, and some people couldn't be trusted. Trinity would spend the next 18 to 22 years in prison, and when she got out, I'd make sure she stayed far away from my life. But that was a problem for future me. Present me had more important things to focus on, like the innovative housing project I was developing for young professionals, designed to prove that affordable didn't have to mean unsustainable, like the new relationship I was building with someone who appreciated my independence rather than seeing it as a threat to their ego, like the life I was creating based on my own values instead of other people's expectations or demands. On a crisp autumn evening, exactly 18 months after Trinity had pushed me off that roof deck, I stood on my loft's balcony watching the sunset paint the Portland skyline gold and purple. I thought about the woman I'd been before that night, trusting, accommodating, willing to sacrifice her own safety to maintain family peace. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more free. I'd lost my family, my hometown, and the naive belief that blood relations would never deliberately try to harm each other. But I'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that I could survive anything, the confidence to trust my own perceptions, and the strength to build a life based on my own choices rather than other people's needs or demands. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.
I looked at these people who had raised me, who had shaped my understanding of right and wrong for the first 26 years of my life, and felt nothing but pity. Family protects each other from harm, I said. Family seeks justice when crimes are committed. Family doesn't ask victims to sacrifice their safety to protect their attackers. You made your choice when you decided that Trinity's freedom was more important than my life. So this is it? Dad asked. You're just gonna walk away and pretend we never existed? I'm going to build a life where I don't have to worry about being murdered by people who claim to love me, I said. I'm going to surround myself with people who value my well-being instead of seeing me as a problem to be managed or an obstacle to be eliminated. I started walking toward my car, then turned back one last time. Trinity will be eligible for parole in 18 years, I said. When that time comes, I'll be there to make sure the parole board understands exactly what kind of person they're considering releasing. But either way, she'll never have access to my life again. I drove away without looking back, leaving them standing on the courthouse steps, looking as broken as I'd felt the night I realized my own sister had tried to kill me. But I wasn't broken anymore. 8 months after Trinity's sentencing, I sold my property in Clearwater Springs and moved to Portland, where I started a new sustainable development company specializing in affordable housing projects.
The city offered opportunities that my small hometown never could, and the larger market allowed me to build a client base that had never heard of the Hayes family drama. I bought a converted warehouse loft in the Arts District with exposed brick walls and enormous windows that filled the space with natural light. I decorated it exactly the way I wanted, with architectural drawings of my completed projects and a collection of sustainable building materials that represented my commitment to environmental responsibility. For the first time in my adult life, every decision I made was mine. The therapy with Dr. Warren had helped me understand that healing from family trauma was an ongoing process, not a destination. There were still days when I felt guilty for abandoning my parents, moments when I questioned whether 22 years was too harsh a sentence for Trinity. But those moments became fewer and farther between as I built a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation and fear. I learned to trust my own judgment again. I learned to recognize manipulation before it took hold. I learned to form relationships with people who saw me as a complete person, rather than someone to be controlled, exploited, or eliminated when convenient. Most importantly, I learned that protecting yourself from people who pose a genuine threat to your safety isn't selfish, it's survival. A year after Trinity's conviction, Detective Chen called with an update I hadn't expected. "Autumn, I wanted you to know that your sister's case has helped us solve 2 other suspicious incidents," she said. "We've been investigating accidents involving people Trinity had conflicts with in college and during her time in New York." "Other victims?"